There are enemies who will do anything to spy on you, but few are foolish enough to crawl into a basement full of skunks during mating season. Like my neighbor Karen. Man, I can still hear her screams like it happened yesterday. Actually, it did happen yesterday. If you're watching this from your bathroom or worse, eating dinner, you might want to save it for later. Trust me. And if you're watching this from someone else's basement right now, drop a comment with your location so I can call the police to come help you out. My name is Finn Scott, and 6 months ago, I moved into Ashland Meadows, a quiet suburban neighborhood with perfect lawns and an HOA that governed everything, right down to the color of your mailbox. I'm a freelance wildlife photographer and YouTube creator, specializing in misunderstood creatures. The move was meant to give me quick access to a nearby nature preserve, close to civilization but not too close. Little did I know, the most dangerous predator I'd encounter wasn't in the wild. It was next door. Her name? Karen Caldwell. President of our HOA, and a 52-year-old suburban warlord. I first met her during my second week in Ashland Meadows. I was unloading camera gear when she approached, clipboard in hand, smile tight enough to crack glass. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, offering a manicured hand. "I'm Karen Caldwell, HOA president." She handed me a 73-page community guideline book. "Pay special attention to sections 4 through 17 on property appearance," she added. Before I could even respond, she was already scanning my lawn with the precision of a military drone. "Your grass is about half an inch too high, and that native plant garden needs proper approval. The form's on page 42. And just like that, she was off, power walking to her next victim, leaving me standing there like I'd just failed an inspection at prison. Thankfully, not everyone in Ashland Meadows was like Karen. I soon met Mrs. Patel, a 70-year-old Indian-American woman who's lived here for 3 decades. She welcomed me with homemade samosas and hard-earned wisdom. "Be careful with that one," she warned, referring to Karen. "She's driven 4 families out this year alone. No one stands up to her because if you do, she makes you pay." Turns out Karen used to work for Evergreen Development but was fired for manipulating environmental reports to fast-track shady property deals. Her husband divorced her too. Poor man. Now, she runs the HOA like a private kingdom, and no one dares challenge her throne. For a while I stayed off her radar, just a few petty violations, a mailbox that was too rustic, a wind chime that was non-compliant, and once a suspiciously artistic bird bath. But that all changed one rainy April evening. I discovered a family of injured skunks sheltering under my back porch. One adult was limping badly. 2 juveniles looked severely malnourished. As someone who's done wildlife rescue for years, I couldn't leave them there. Not in that storm, not in that condition. So I did what I was trained to do. I brought them into my basement, which I'd converted into a temporary wildlife care unit. State certified, properly ventilated, separated zones for species. Fully legal. I called my friend Dr. Samantha Lewis, a wildlife biologist from the local university, to come check them out. Let me just say, caring for skunks during mating season is not for the faint of heart. But for me, it's a labor of love. That first night, I set up a warm enclosure for the adult female, who I later named Marigold for the yellow tint in her stripe. Her back leg looked like it had been caught in a trap. The 2 juveniles, barely old enough to be on their own, were thin and weak, their ribs showing beneath sleek black fur. I worked slowly, talking to them in soft, low tones. "Easy, girl. Just checking your leg. You're safe here." There's something therapeutic about it, for them and for me. I cleaned Marigold's wound, administered fluids, and prepped a special high-protein diet. By 3 a.m., they were finally resting. Tired? Sure. But that moment, the calm after chaos, it's why I do what I do. Days passed. Every morning began with health checks, hydration, and new food. Midday was enrichment time. Soft fleece, river stones, floating toys in shallow trays. Evenings were for meal prep, meds, and updating their progress. By the end of the first week, the juveniles had gained weight. Their eyes shone brighter. Their movements grew playful. Even Marigold's leg was healing nicely, though she'd always have a slight limp. But I hadn't planned for mating season behaviors. The male juvenile, not quite mature, but clearly getting ideas, started pacing, in figure eights clicking softly at night. Here's the tricky part. In wildlife rehab, you must avoid letting animals bond too closely with humans. If they lose their natural fear, they'll die in the wild. So no cuddles. No extra talking. I wore the same neutral clothes each time. Entered from the same direction. Fed and cleaned without excess interaction. And yes, the ventilation system in my basement? State of the art. Charcoal filters. Air purifiers. Enzyme. Sprays. The works. Under normal conditions, you wouldn't smell a thing. But as Sam warned me, during mating season, nothing contains that musk. It's not a defensive spray, but it's potent. Sure enough, a faint musk started seeping upstairs. Occasionally, it even drifted out into my yard, and that's when Karen noticed. Sam visited. Again the next morning. She gave the skunks a clean bill of health, but with a warning. They're healthy, but you're entering peak scent territory. Might want to warn your neighbors. Right as she said that, I saw movement outside the, basement window. There she was, Karen, crouched behind a hydrangea bush, phone raised, taking photos. Our eyes met. She ducked and power walked away, floral print dress flapping like a battle flag. That's Karen, I told Sam. President, spy, possibly part raccoon. Sam raised a brow. You have all the necessary permits, right? I nodded, pulling out a folder. State certified, federally registered, every duck in a row. Doesn't mean she won't try something, Sam said darkly. She was right. The very next morning, I woke to an official HOA notice taped to my front door. Unauthorized housing of wild animals. Immediate removal required within 48 hours or face substantial fines. Mandatory attendance at the next HOA board meeting to address violations. Concoction of sulfur and rot that turned her expression into pure agony. She stumbled back, arms flailing in panic, but in doing so, she startled a second skunk, which responded in kind. The screen lit up in flashes of chaos. Karen whirled around in the tight space, now gagging and wailing, blinded by tears and overpowered by the stench. She made for the staircase, slipping once on a patch of bedding hay, tumbling halfway up before scrambling to her feet and clawing, her way out like a banshee possessed. Rod, waiting outside with his arms crossed smugly, perked up at the sudden noise, just in time to see Karen bolt from the basement door, retching and gasping for breath. The look on his face as the smell hit him was priceless. He staggered backward, covering his nose, eyes wide in disbelief. By the time I returned to my property, arriving just minutes later, Karen had fled, and Rod had abandoned his post, probably in search of tomato juice or some industrial-strength cleaner. I retrieved her dropped phone from the basement floor, where it had captured nearly the entire debacle in crisp HD. I uploaded the footage to multiple backup drives and cloud storage, just in case. The next morning, I emailed a carefully crafted letter to the HOA board. It included the footage, a timeline of events, and documentation of Karen's repeated unlawful entries and harassment. I also attached statements from Sam and a few trusted neighbors, all of whom confirmed Karen's obsessive behavior and vendetta. By noon, the neighborhood was buzzing. The video had, somehow, leaked. Someone on the board had clearly shared it, and within hours it was being passed around in HOA circles like wildfire. The footage was devastatingly clear. Karen had broken in, trespassed, and triggered a wildlife encounter of her own making. That evening, an emergency board meeting was called. This time, the atmosphere was completely different. Karen showed up late, hair disheveled, sunglasses on indoors, and reeking faintly of burnt rubber and fermented onions, despite clearly having attempted to scrub the stench off. The board members didn't even look at her. When she tried to speak, one of them raised a hand. "We've seen the footage," the treasurer said, voice heavy with disappointment. "This board cannot overlook your behavior. But he kept wild animals, she snapped, pointing at me like an unstable courtroom witness. And you broke into his home to prove it, said another board member. That's not enforcement. Karen, that's criminal. Sam stood beside me, arms folded, her badge from the Wildlife Commission clipped prominently to her jacket. And as I've stated multiple times, Mr. Scott's care of these animals is legal, temporary, and supervised. What isn't legal is what your president did last night. The vote to remove Karen as HOA president was swift and unanimous. Roddy tried to defend her, but his own role was evident on the footage too. He was warned to cease all unauthorized HOA activities or face legal action. Karen didn't even stay to hear the end of the meeting. She stormed out in silence, her power crumbling like a house of cards. As for the skunks, they stayed a little while longer until the mating season safely ended. Then, under Sam's supervision, they were released into a protected habitat far from neighborhood politics and HOA drama. In the weeks that followed, peace gradually returned to the community. Without Karen's iron grip, the HOA board began revising outdated policies, actually involving homeowners in decisions for the first time in years. Violations dropped, tensions eased, and neighbors who once avoided each other now gathered at community potlucks and evening walks. Mrs. Patel even made her famous ginger cardamom cookies again, an event she once vowed would only happen when the neighborhood stopped stinking of tyranny and dead roses. Sam and I continued our friendship, occasionally helping other local wildlife in need. My basement was scrubbed, aired out, and finally returned to normal. And though the smell lingered for a few days, it had ultimately served its purpose. Some people learn from logic, others learn from law. Karen learned from skunks, and that, as it turned out, was the most effective education she ever received. Behind her, a security feature I'd installed after previous break-in attempts clicked into place. Karen began pounding on the door, mascara streaming down her face in black rivulets as her eyes watered uncontrollably from the chemical assault. Rod, help me, she screamed, but her loyal sidekick was nowhere to be seen. What Karen didn't realize was that the skunk spray wasn't just in the air. It was on her. Her designer blouse, her carefully styled hair, her skin. Every movement she made released more of the oily, yellow-tinted particles into the air around her, creating a feedback loop of escalating olfactory horror. And the skunks, they weren't done. Startled and agitated, the mother skunk, still defending her young, released a second blast, this time directly at Karen's legs. The spray soaked through her white linen pants with a vengeance. The smell was so overpowering that it actually came through on the security footage. I had to move away from my laptop screen as I watched from my car. Karen was now bent over, dry heaving, her body convulsing with each wave of the odor. She tried holding her breath, but eventually had to gasp, only inhaling more of the noxious chemicals storm into her lungs. I can't breathe, she choked out between spasms of coughing. The skunks, now safely retreated to the far corner of their enclosure, watched her with what I swear looked like smug satisfaction, their natural defense mechanism proving brutally effective. Karen tried using her scarf as a makeshift mask, but the thin fabric did nothing to filter the overwhelming stench. She crawled toward the basement window, leaving a trail of skunk oil across my concrete floor, desperately seeking fresh air. But the windows were too small, too high, after what felt like an eternity. Though it was only about 15 minutes, I finally called Officer Turner to report a break-in at my home. By the time the police arrived, Karen had collapsed in a corner, sobbing uncontrollably, her entire body saturated in a smell so pungent that the responding officers had to put on masks before entering the basement. Officer Turner approached her cautiously. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, trying not to inhale too deeply, "you're under arrest for criminal trespassing." Karen, red-faced from humiliation and rage, screamed, "I'll sue all of you, especially you, Scott." But no one could stand close enough to hear the end of her sentence. What Karen didn't know, not yet, was that this was just the beginning of her odor nightmare. Because once you've been sprayed by a skunk, that smell sticks for weeks. News of the break-in and Karen's epic skunking spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Despite posting bail and being released the next day, Karen had to live with a clinging stench that no amount of scrubbing could wash away. She attempted a counterattack by suing me for harboring dangerous animals. But Sam, as an expert, witnessed submitted documentation showing skunks aren't classified as dangerous, only defensive. The security footage clearly showed Karen illegally breaking into my home. Worse still, neighbors began avoiding her. Not out of fear, but revulsion. HOA meetings had to be moved online because no one could bear being in the same room as her. Rod, who had witnessed Karen's skunk attack and police questioning, began realizing just how much he was being used. When she begged him to falsely testify that I had lured her into the basement, Rod refused, then distanced himself completely. Even her most loyal ally had turned away. Mrs. Patel and other neighbors, inspired by my stand, began openly challenging Karen's HOA authority. They demanded a special election for a new HOA president. In a desperate attempt to save face, Karen organized an emergency HOA Zoom meeting. The agenda: voting to expel me from the neighborhood for endangering the community. But what happened next would change everything. The meeting quickly turned into an informal trial. Not of me, but of Karen. One by one, neighbors spoke out. Years of intimidation, fines for absurd violations, bullying tactics. Then a new speaker requested to address the meeting: James Peterson, a wealthy and influential resident, retired corporate attorney. His pristine colonial-style home was regularly featured in Home and Garden magazines. He had been Karen's most powerful ally, always siding with her in the name of protecting property values. When his name appeared in the Zoom waiting room, everyone assumed he was joining to deliver the final blow to my defense. "I'd like to address the committee and all residents of Ashland Meadows," James began, his deep voice commanding attention. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and continued. "I've been a resident here for 17 years. I've always believed in maintaining certain standards, which is why I supported many of Karen's initiatives in the past." Karen's face lit up with smug satisfaction. But it didn't last long. "However," James said, his tone hardening, "I can no longer remain silent about what I've uncovered." He shared his screen. A series of emails appeared, correspondence between Karen and executives at Evergreen Development. These documents came into my possession 3 weeks ago during due diligence on a potential investment with Evergreen. What I found was deeply disturbing. The emails outlined a systematic scheme to devalue properties in Ashland Meadows through aggressive HOA enforcement, making homeowners more likely to sell under pressure. Once the homes were listed under market value, Evergreen would swoop in. Karen was receiving 5% commission on each property Evergreen acquired, a kickback scheme that had netted her over $100,000 in 2 years. "And that's not all," James said, his voice rising. "Karen was selectively enforcing HOA rules only on homes Evergreen wanted. Look here." He brought up a color-coded map of the neighborhood. Homes targeted by Evergreen had been hit with 8 times more violations. My house was marked in bright red, a prime acquisition target. Karen's environmental report scandal, the one that got her fired, was just the tip of a very large, very rotten iceberg. The Zoom meeting exploded. Martha Williams, who had received 15 violations in the past month for her garden, unmuted herself and screamed, "How could you do this to us?" Another screen blinked to life. Bernard Cooper. "I lost $30,000 on that sale. I had to move away from my grandkids because of you." James wasn't finished. He shared another document. A formal state investigation notice from the Real Estate Commission. "I've submitted everything to the authorities. Karen isn't just facing trespassing charges. She's looking at fraud, conspiracy, and breach of fiduciary duty as an HOA officer." The camera cut back to Karen, pale, speechless, still visibly sweating and of course, still reeking. This is a misunderstanding," she croaked. "Those emails are taken out of context. James, you've always supported me. Why would you do this?" James didn't flinch. "Because I believe in integrity, and when I bought my home here I swore to be a good neighbor, something you clearly never understood." He turned to the rest of us. "I apologize to everyone who suffered under this scheme while I remained blind to it, especially to you, Mr. Scott. Your courage brought this to light." For a moment, the meeting was silent. Then it erupted. Neighbors began shouting for Karen's immediate resignation. Officer Turner, who had joined the call to clarify charges, unmuted himself. "In light of Mr. Peterson's evidence, I'd like to inform everyone the police will be expanding our investigation. Mrs. Caldwell, I suggest you retain an attorney." Karen's face, already ghost pale, took on a greenish hue. Her voice trembled. I resign from the HOA." And with that, Karen Caldwell, former Queen of Ashland Meadows, fell from power, disgraced, abandoned, and still stinking of justice and skunk. An extremist with a criminal record trying to damage my reputation in the community. That's what Karen spread around. But instead of turning my neighbors against me, her rumor only made many curious, even admiring, of my commitment to environmental protection. Meanwhile, the skunks had fully recovered and mating season was coming to an end. Sam and I prepared to release them back into the wild at a nearby conservation area. We organized a small educational event for interested neighbors about the importance of skunks in the ecosystem. Surprisingly, many showed up, including children from the neighborhood. Karen, still smelly and increasingly isolated, discovered that the real estate company she had connections with was withdrawing from the project to buy properties in the neighborhood. Police investigations had begun into their suspicious activities, particularly when they uncovered connections to Karen's manipulated environmental reports from her past. Rod, realizing Karen had been using his feelings for her, also turned his back on her. The legal consequences unfolded quickly. The local newspaper even dubbed it the skunk scandal. What began as a trespassing charge evolved into something far more serious once Peterson submitted the full evidence to the authorities. The district attorney's office filed multiple charges against Karen: fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, falsification of HOA records, and breach of fiduciary duty. Evergreen Development was also pulled into the spotlight. The Buis company came under intense scrutiny, and eventually 3 executives were charged as co-conspirators in the scheme to artificially depress property values in Ashland Meadows. I attended every court hearing, sitting quietly at the back as Karen's case made its way through the legal system. She hired an expensive attorney from the city, but the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution presented a clear timeline. Karen had systematically targeted homeowners who refused to sell to Evergreen. She'd used her position as HOA president to make their lives unbearable, until they gave in. Financial records revealed she'd received nearly $170,000 in consulting fees from Evergreen over the last 3 years, all unreported, which led to tax evasion charges too. But the worst evidence came from Karen's own emails. In one, she wrote, "The Scott property is prime real estate with that extra corner lot. I'll find a way to make him sell by summer." That email was dated just 2 weeks after I moved in. Another revealed her strategy. If you hit them with at least 1 violation notice per week, most homeowners break within 3 months. The wildlife lover might be tougher, but everyone has a breaking point. Karen eventually accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 4 felony counts. Her sentence: 18 months of house arrest, 5 years probation, and restitution payments to all the homeowners who had sold under duress, nearly $700,000. As part of the plea, she was permanently barred from serving in any HOA leadership position or working in real estate in any capacity again. Evergreen Development didn't get off easy either. They were fined $3 million and ordered to dissolve the company entirely. On the day of Karen's sentencing, I ran into Rod outside the courthouse. He looked relieved and ashamed. "I had no idea it went so deep," he said, unable to meet my eyes. "I thought she just cared about the neighborhood. You know, making it perfect. I never knew about the kickbacks or the targeting." I believed him. Rod had been manipulated, maybe more than any of us because of how much he trusted her. He'd agreed to testify in exchange for immunity for his minor role in the trespassing incident. "She used all of us," he said quietly, "but especially me." What happened next honestly surprised me. Rod, once Karen's most devoted ally, became an advocate for neighborhood healing. He organized community meetings where people could share their stories of Karen's harassment. It became a kind of collective therapy. Many residents had thought they were alone in their struggles. These meetings revealed just how widespread Karen's manipulation had been and began rebuilding trust between neighbors. Rod even volunteered to help with the wildlife habitat project Mrs. Patel had initiated as interim HOA president. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who once backed Karen's fight against my skunk rehabilitation was now out here installing nesting boxes for birds and planting native flora to attract pollinators. I joined him one Saturday morning to install a bat house. "I think I needed this," Rod admitted as we worked, "to feel like I'm making up for some of the damage she caused, that I helped cause." In one last desperate move, Karen tried to sabotage the skunk release event. She called animal control and falsely claimed I was illegally trafficking wildlife. But Officer Turner, who'd been monitoring the entire situation from the beginning, quickly cleared things up and shut the attempt down before it got off the ground. When I confronted Karen that final time, I didn't lash out. Instead, I offered her a special formula Sam had developed, something that would help eliminate the lingering skunk odor. It was a gesture of kindness, unexpected even to me. Karen didn't know how to respond. She just stood there, silent. The skunk release was a huge success. Neighbors showed up. A local film crew came. It turned into a full-on community education event about wildlife conservation. My YouTube channel blew up after I posted the video. The title? Karen hid in my cellar to spy on me. Didn't know it was full of skunks in mating season. Karen, realizing she had become an internet sensation and the subject of countless memes, sold her house and moved away. Before leaving, she left a brief apology note. It wasn't much, but it was something. The aftermath of the scandal brought unexpected and positive changes to Ashland Meadows. Under Mrs. Patel's leadership, the HOA transformed. Old restrictive covenants were reviewed and updated. Many were eliminated. A commitment to transparency was established. All meetings were now recorded and made available to residents. Finances were audited quarterly by an independent firm. Most importantly, a new rule was passed. Any major changes to HOA regulations would now require a supermajority vote. No single person would ever again hold the kind of unchecked power Karen had abused. Physically, the neighborhood changed too. With the threat of commercial development gone, residents felt free to personalize their homes. Native gardens replaced uniform lawns. Solar panels appeared. A community garden was built on a vacant lot Evergreen once wanted. There was even talk of establishing a small nature sanctuary with educational signs about local wildlife. Yes, including skunks. My own reputation in the neighborhood shifted dramatically. Where once I'd been seen as the new guy threatening property values, I was now something of a local hero. Neighbors stopped by to ask about wildlife sightings. Families asked me to speak at schools. Conservation became cool. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen's attempt to drive me out had cemented my place in the community. 6 months later, Ashland Meadows was a better, stronger, more connected place. As for Karen, I heard she moved to another state, a neighborhood without an HOA. And, according to Rod, who had surprisingly become a friend, she'd even adopted a cat from a local animal rescue shelter. As for me, I continued my work with wildlife. My YouTube channel passed 1 million subscribers. And yes, occasionally I still see that family of skunks wandering through my backyard garden. I named the lead one Karen Jr. Humorous reminder that sometimes justice comes in the most fragrant ways. If you enjoyed this true AS story of neighborhood drama and sweet-smelling justice, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more wildlife adventures, some featuring actual wild animals, and others featuring the most dangerous species of all, the suburban HOA president. And if you've got your own wild HOA stories or neighborhood wildlife encounters, I'd love to hear them. Drop them in the comments. Until next time, this is Finn Scott reminding you that sometimes The best defense against toxic people is a family of skunks in mating season.